Welcome my sky-high friends, to another Cannabis Chronicle. Let's soar into outer orbit, look into the expanse of space behind our eyelids and settle in for these fables that will surely have you soon floating away. Listen a story, first timer. I remember the first time I used medical cannabis like it was yesterday. It was about 5 years ago. I'd been dealing with chronic back pain for over a decade, nothing seemed to help. Prescription meds made me groggy, physical therapy only went so far, and I couldn't live with the idea of taking painkillers forever. One night, after yet another sleepless battle with the pain, I decided to try something different. My doctor had suggested medical cannabis before, but I was skeptical. Cannabis? For pain? It seemed too good to be true. But that night, I was desperate. I went to a local dispensary the next day. I still remember the smell that hit me when I walked in, earthy, kind of calming in its own way. I told the bud tender about my pain, and they recommended a strain high in CBD. They explained it wouldn't get me high, but it might help with the pain and inflammation. I was nervous, but at that point, I would have tried anything. That evening, I lit up for the first time in my life. I wasn't expecting much, but within half an hour, something incredible happened. The tension in my lower back started to melt away. It wasn't like a sudden jolt or anything. It was more like someone slowly turning the volume down on the pain. For the first time in years, I felt relief, real relief. But it wasn't just the physical sensation that changed. My whole mindset shifted. The constant frustration, the feeling of being trapped in my own body, started to fade. I wasn't just pain-free, I felt calm, present. For the first time, I was able to just sit and enjoy the moment without my mind being consumed by pain. I even laughed a little, something I hadn't done in a while. That night, I slept deeply. Without waking up every hour, without tossing and turning in pain. I woke up the next morning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. It was like my body had pressed reset. Since that night, cannabis has been part of my routine. I've tried different strains, different forms, edibles, tinctures, you name it. Each has its own effect, but the result is the same. I get to live my life without pain being the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I feel before bed. It's funny. People talk about cannabis like it's this radical thing, but for me, it's been the most natural solution in the world. I'm not saying it's a magic bullet, there are still bad days. But knowing I have something that works for me, something that doesn't make me feel like a zombie, has changed everything. I don't know if I'd say that first time was my best time with cannabis, but it was definitely the most important. It gave me my life back. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Now, another listener story, the medical cannabis grower. I've been growing medical cannabis for almost 8 years now, but there's one memory that always sticks with me. It was my second harvest, back when I was still figuring things out. I had a small indoor grow operation, just a handful of plants. I wasn't exactly what you'd call an expert. I'd read a lot, watched all the videos, and had a few conversations with seasoned growers, but honestly, I was learning on the fly. One of the biggest lessons I learned early on was how temperamental cannabis plants can be. Everything matters, the light, the water, the humidity, the nutrients. It's like taking care of a bunch of picky houseplants, except the stakes feel much higher. There's this balance between nurturing and letting the plants do their thing, and during that second harvest, I thought I'd ruined it all. I'd been growing this strain that was supposed to be really high in CBD, perfect for pain management. I'd spent weeks adjusting the light schedule and carefully measuring the nutrients. Everything seemed to be going fine until I noticed the leaves on a couple of the plants turning yellow. I freaked out. I thought it was a nutrient deficiency, so I added more to the water. Big mistake. Within days, the plants were looking worse, droopy, sad. I didn't know it at the time, but I'd overfed them. It was nutrient burn. I had no idea what to do. I remember sitting there in the grow room, staring at these plants that I'd put so much time and effort into, just wilting in front of me. It was like watching your hard work wither away, and I felt helpless. I almost gave up. But then I remembered something a fellow grower told me: sometimes, you just have to let the plants heal themselves. So, I backed off. I flushed the soil with clean water and just let the plants be. Every day, I'd check on them, and slowly but surely, they started to bounce back. The leaves that were yellow fell off, but new growth started to appear. It took weeks, but eventually, they recovered. And when I finally harvested those plants, I couldn't believe it. The yield was small, but the quality was incredible. That CBD strain ended up being one of the best I've ever grown. The potency, the flavor, the effects, it all exceeded my expectations. I had patients telling me how much it helped with their pain, how they finally got a good night's sleep. Hearing that made all the stress and frustration worth it. That experience taught me one of the most important lessons in growing cannabis: patience. These plants are resilient. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is step back and trust the process. Now, every time I see a little yellowing on the leaves, I don't panic. I know it's part of the journey. People think growing cannabis is just about throwing some seeds in the ground and waiting. But it's so much more than that. It's a relationship. You learn to listen to the plants, to understand what they need. And in return, they give you something that can truly change lives. I'm proud of that. Another listener story: the dispensary owner. I never thought I'd end up owning a medical cannabis dispensary. 10 years ago, I was working a regular 9 to 5, nothing special, just a job that paid the bills. But everything changed when my mom got sick. She was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and the pain was unbearable for her. The medications the doctors gave her helped, but the side effects were brutal. She was constantly nauseous, couldn't sleep, and had lost her appetite. Watching her go through that, I felt completely powerless. One day, a friend of mine suggested medical cannabis. I didn't know much about it back then, but I was willing to try anything that could give her some relief. We found a doctor who recommended it, and after navigating the whole process to get her a medical card, I went to a dispensary for the first time. I remember walking into that dispensary feeling skeptical and overwhelmed. There were so many strains, edibles, tinctures, and oils. It felt more like walking into a pharmacy than what I had expected. The staff there were so knowledgeable. They listened to my mom's symptoms and recommended a CBD-dominant strain, something that would help with her pain without getting her high. That was the turning point. Within a week of using cannabis, my mom's life completely changed. Her pain was manageable, and she could sleep again. She even started cooking again, something she hadn't done in months. It wasn't a miracle cure, but it gave her a quality of life back that we hadn't seen in a long time. That experience stuck with me. It made me realize how many people could benefit from medical cannabis but don't know where to start, or are afraid to try it. I wanted to help bridge that gap. A couple of years later, when the laws in my state became more favorable for dispensaries, I took a leap of faith and opened my own. Running a dispensary isn't what most people think it is. Sure, you have the typical challenges of owning a business, keeping track of inventory, hiring the right staff, navigating regulations, but what really drives me is the people who walk through that door every day. Most of them aren't looking for a high, they are looking for relief. They are like my mom was, desperate for something that will help them manage their pain, anxiety, or illness in a way that doesn't destroy their body. I've had patients come in who can barely move because of chronic pain. I've had cancer patients who can't keep food down, and parents of kids with epilepsy who are just trying to stop the seizures. When they come back a few weeks later and tell me their lives have improved because of the products we offer, that's the best feeling in the world. I've had people cry in my store, just out of pure gratitude. That's when I know we're doing something right. It hasn't all been easy, though. The stigma is still there. I've had to deal with people who think we're just here to get people stoned, who don't understand that for so many, this is medicine. But every time I see the impact we're making, it reinforces why I started this journey in the first place. One story that will always stay with me is a veteran who came in one day. He'd been dealing with PTSD and chronic pain for years and had been on every prescription medication you can think of. None of them worked, and the side effects were unbearable. We talked for a long time, and I recommended a CBD strain and some edibles for the pain. He was skeptical but willing to try. A month later, he came back. I almost didn't recognize him. He'd gained weight, his skin was healthier, and there was light in his eyes again. He told me that for the first time in years, his pain was still there, but it was manageable. That day, he hugged me. He told me that I'd given him his life back, not the cannabis, but the hope that things could get better. That moment, standing there in the middle of the dispensary, was one of the most humbling experiences of my life. It's easy to forget sometimes, in the day-to-day grind of running a business, why we do what we do. But when you hear stories like his, when you see the difference this plant can make in someone's life, it all becomes clear again. It's not about the profits or the trends or the politics surrounding cannabis. It's about people. It's about giving them options, giving them relief, and sometimes, giving them hope. I still think back to my mom's experience, the way her quality of life improved after starting medical cannabis, and it drives everything I do. Every time someone walks through that door, I want them to feel cared for, listened to, and respected. I want them to leave with something that can genuinely help them, whether it's for pain, anxiety, insomnia, or any of the countless reasons people turn to cannabis. Owning a dispensary has been one of the most challenging and rewarding things I've ever done. The road hasn't always been smooth, but moments like that veteran's story make it all worth it. I'm proud of the work we do here, and I'm proud to be a part of this movement that's helping people heal in ways that medicine alone couldn't. Every day, we're breaking down barriers and changing lives. And for me, that's what it's all about. Next, listen a story, a grandparent's awakening. I'll be the first to admit, I never thought I'd be telling this story. You see, I'm from the generation that knew marijuana as dope, the drug that ruined lives and destroyed families. I was born in 1950, went to college in the late 60s, and by the time the 80s rolled around, I had formed a solid opinion. Weed, pot, grass, whatever you called it, was bad news. In my eyes, it was the root of all those late-night tragedies, overdoses, and the kind of rebellion I wanted to shield my family from. For decades, I stood firm in that belief. I watched anti-drug campaigns roll out on television and nodded in agreement. Even as the conversation shifted and people began talking about medical marijuana, I couldn't bring myself to see it differently. In my mind, dope was dope. There was no way something that tore people apart could ever be considered medicine. But, as the saying goes, life has a funny way of humbling you when you least expect it. That moment came when my grandson, Alex, fell sick. He's in his 20s now, bright, sharp as a tack, with his whole life ahead of him. But he was diagnosed with a condition I couldn't even pronounce, let alone understand. All I knew was that the treatments were multiple harsh surgeries, pills that seemed to make him worse before they made him better. He was suffering, wasting away in front of me, and it felt like there was nothing we could do. That's when my daughter, his mother, brought up medical marijuana. I still remember the look on her face, the way she approached the subject like she was walking on eggshells around me. She knew how I felt. For decades, I had told her and everyone in our family that marijuana was a gateway drug, that it would lead to harder substances. But there she was, telling me that this drug could be the one thing to ease Alex's pain, to bring him some relief when modern medicine couldn't. I wanted to say no. Everything inside me screamed that this was wrong, that we were opening a door we couldn't close. But then I saw Alex, my grandson, barely able to eat, barely able to hold himself up, his face pale and his eyes hollow. He looked at me, and I saw the person I loved most in this world, crumbling under the weight of something I couldn't fight. That's when I agreed. The first time Alex used medical marijuana, I sat in the corner of the room, arms crossed, waiting for something bad to happen. I expected the worst, and I was ready to say, "I told you so," if anything went wrong. But instead, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Alex smiled. He could eat, he could relax, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't in constant pain. I don't think I realized how much I had been holding my breath until I saw him breathe easy again. It was a shift that happened slowly, over time. Each time Alex used marijuana, I noticed the change. His quality of life improved. It wasn't a cure, but it gave him the chance to live, to be present, and to feel human again. I found myself questioning everything I had believed for so long. I started reading, researching, things I should have done years ago. And what I discovered shocked me. For decades, I had thought marijuana was the villain. I blamed it for the societal ills I'd seen, the addiction and crime that plagued my generation. But the more I learned, the more I realized the real villain wasn't the plant, it was the misinformation, the stigmas, and the systems that criminalized something that had the potential to help people like my grandson. It was like a veil had been lifted. All those years, I had believed in a narrative that ignored the science, the stories, and the lived experiences of people who had been helped by medical marijuana. And here I was, face to face with undeniable evidence in the form of my own grandchild. Looking back now, I feel a mix of regret and relief. Regret that it took me so long to open my eyes, but relief that I finally did. Alex is doing better. He's not cured, but he's living again. He's able to laugh, to eat, to sleep without waking up in agony. And that, to me, is more than any outdated belief could ever be worth. As the years pass, I've started to talk to other people my age, many of whom still hold onto the old fears about marijuana. Some are open to the conversation, while others aren't. But one thing I know for sure, this is a new age. We're seeing things we never thought we'd see, and it's time to embrace that. The world is changing, and maybe that's for the best. The real villain, I realize now, isn't the plant. It's the closed-mindedness that stops us from seeing its potential. It's funny, isn't it? After all these decades, I finally see the truth. And it's my grandson who taught me that.